Boldwood presents The Alchemist's Secret, written by Clare Marchant and read by Helen Stern. To my book club chums, thanks for some great bookish chat. Chapter 1, 2026. Paige pulled her car across the gravel drive, the fuel tank having repeatedly flashed a warning that it was empty for the past 10 miles, and stopped outside the front door. Her father would frown at this liberty. He always insisted that the turning circle, with its pretty terracotta pots of curly-stemmed olive trees flanking the heavy oak front door, was for visitors only. According to him, when customers approached the house, it was important they saw it in its full, imposing splendour, as they might approach it on their big day. Even the thought of a wedding car with white ribbons fluttering in the breeze as it came to a halt in front of her family home made Paige's chest burn. Slamming her car door shut, she ran towards her father, Simon, who was now standing in the open doorway, with his hands on his hips, his eyebrows raised in surprise. "Dad! Dad!" Her voice rose as she threw her arms around him and burst into tears. She hardly knew where they were coming from anymore. It had taken her 3 hours to drive from her home in South London, having had to stop several times when the unbidden tears had run down her face, obscuring her vision. "Darling, what on earth is the matter?" Simon, with his arms around her shaking shoulders, guided her into the grand entrance hall, pushing the front door closed with his foot. He hadn't even mentioned her car abandoned outside. She opened her mouth to tell him why she'd turned up on his doorstep, but in her distress, no words came out. Just a wail, followed by a gasping, as she tried to catch her breath. Wordlessly, he led her through the doorway at the rear of the hall, from which they walked down a dimly lit passage to the back of the building, and then into the kitchen, where he pointed towards the battered, worn wing chair beneath the window. It had been there for more years than she could remember, and she sank into its familiar, comforting, threadbare depths. Minutes later, Simon handed her a steaming cup of tea, together with a tumbler containing half an inch of an amber-coloured liquid. Blowing her nose on a tissue retrieved from the back pocket of her jeans, she sniffed at the glass suspiciously. As she expected, it was Irish whiskey, her dad's favourite. She raised her eyebrows at him. "Medicinal," he said. "Drink up." His face was still etched with concern, the lines across his forehead even deeper than normal, his brows pulled down low over his familiar, pale summer sky blue eyes she'd inherited from him, although without even looking in a mirror, she knew hers were currently red and almost obscured by her puffy, tear-soaked skin. They'd been that way for the past 24 hours. Actually, the past 22 hours and 45 minutes, because it had been 6 o'clock the previous evening when her husband, Tyler, had got in from work, and she'd laid her evidence before him. Evidence that he couldn't dispute. "Is it Tyler?" Simon asked. As though by thinking about her husband, she'd manifested him in her father's conscience, he'd guessed immediately who was at the root of her distress. Taking a large sip of her whiskey and feeling its robust, smoky warmth steal down inside, she nodded, taking a deep breath before she spoke the words out loud. Because once they left her mouth, they were out there forever, and she couldn't keep it to herself any longer. "He's married." She blurted it out, and the words hung in the silence as Simon stared at her, obviously waiting for her to say more. Finally, when it seemed he realised she wasn't going to say anything else, as she sat alternately sipping both of her drinks, he replied, "I know that, love. I have a photo of you both standing with Elvis in a wedding chapel in Vegas." "No, Dad. He's married to someone else." Her voice rose in a crescendo. Cursing under his breath, in 2 steps, Simon walked across the room and was perched on the arm of her chair, putting his arm around her shoulders and pulling her into his warm, reassuring side. Over the years, he'd enjoyed a little too much wedding catering, a byproduct of running the family home as a venue, and he was now carrying a few extra pounds. But today, his bulk was a comfort to her. As she overcame the desire to dissolve into tears again, Paige tried to explain. I know he's married to me. Well, that's what I thought. But I've discovered that he isn't. Because when he and I went through that sham of a wedding, it transpires he was actually already married to someone else. All this time, I've been living with a bigamist. I don't believe it. Simon got back to his feet and started to pace up and down the kitchen. Taking Paige's mug, which was still half full from her hands, he threw the contents into the sink, before refilling the kettle and starting to make another cup. She didn't say anything. She knew that making tea was what he did when he was processing something. When their parents had divorced 15 years previously, she and her brother George had both opted to continue living with their father, rather than squash into the country cottage their mother had moved to, and they had both teased him about the increased number of boxes of tea bags he needed to buy. Perhaps she'd better add them to the whiteboard shopping list on the kitchen wall. So, all the time he's been with you, even your wedding day, he was secretly married to someone else? Why? Who? I can't get my head around this. Are you sure? How do you know this? The kettle boiled, and momentarily he paused in his barrage of questions as he poured boiling water into the cups. Paige took advantage of the lull in the interrogation to try and explain further. Of course I'm sure, Dad. I've met his other wife. His actual wife. Such a cliché, I've been so stupid. He's definitely still married, and apparently happily married to Lauren. Despite him telling me when we first met that she was just his ex-girlfriend, Ava's mum. At least he didn't make that bit up. All that explanation of how he co-parents between Thursday evening and Sunday morning, and how Lauren goes and stays with her boyfriend during that time, it was a big fat lie. She hasn't been going anywhere, because as far as she's concerned, he was renting a room in London while he was at the office during the week, then coming back to their marital home. She paused for a moment as her voice began to rise again, then took a deep breath and continued. And working from home on a Friday. Then he drives back to London on a Sunday, ready for work on Monday morning. Let me get this straight. Simon put her replacement cup of tea on the dresser beside her, pushing a pile of paperwork to one side. He hasn't been looking after Ava when he's in Bristol. He's just been going home to his wife. But why did he marry you? Why didn't he carry on as you were? Have you had it out with him? Of course. I wasn't just going to believe some ranting woman who just turned up on my doorstep, accusing me of having an affair with her husband. Somehow she saw a message I'd sent on his phone. Turns out he's got 2 mobiles. Of course he has. The oldest trick in the book. The one he used for me was in his jacket pocket, and it lit up when I sent him a WhatsApp while he was out of the room. It didn't take Lauren long to stalk me through my social media and find my website, and from that she was able to get my address. Anyway, I waited until he got home from work yesterday, and I asked him outright if it was true. He didn't even try and deny it. He just bleated on about how he fell in love with me and didn't want to lose me. So he had pretended Lauren was just an ex-girlfriend with whom he'd had a daughter. And I now realise, by saying that Lauren was only his partner, he didn't have to produce a divorce certificate for the wedding. Oh, and of course, she hadn't been stopping him from introducing me to Ava. It was just an excuse. He spent hours going on and on, bitching about her stopping his contact if he brought Ava to London or if I went down to Bristol. I just thought she'd come round in the end. What are you going to do? Simon asked. Are you going to the police? What he's done, it's illegal. I don't know. I haven't decided. I don't suppose I will. If I do, then it makes everything public, and that's not fair to Lauren. She's just as innocent in all this as I am. All this time, she thought Tyler was just working away from home, and they were happily married. And now he has nothing. She's thrown him out, and I've changed the locks at my flat. Do you want to stay here for a while? You know you always have a room under my roof. Or you could go to your mum. Have you told her yet? Thanks, Dad. Finally, she was able to raise a weak smile. I'll give Mum a ring in a bit. But you know what she's like. She'll be sympathetic for 5 minutes and then tell me to pull myself together. I honestly don't think I can. I'm broken. She felt the tears welling again and trying to choke her. And taking a big breath, she tried to quell them. Besides, you were the closest to drive to, and you have more space. Everything I could carry is in the back of my car, including all my work equipment. I can continue with my millinery here. There's plenty of light in my old room. I won't stay with you long. I don't want to be in your way. If I can just be here for a while and sort out what I want to do next, that would be great. Lick my wounds and feel sorry for myself. I also need to find out what happens legally about the marriage, if I have to get it annulled. I don't know what to do with my flat. It's tainted now, full of false memories. I might sell it. There's nothing to keep me in London. As she said the words, she knew she'd never go back there, to her old life, to the carnage Tyler had created. It was over. Chapter 2 1672 Jeanne laid her paintbrush down on the pallet and stretched her back. She'd been sitting in one position for almost 2 hours now, and she could feel her muscles stiffening. The view across the parterre garden and maze, reputedly the largest and finest in all of Europe, to the fields of barley and wheat rippling in the breeze beyond, was one that she'd painted several times before. But in every season, with each change of weather, it looked so different. She felt compelled to capture it on the canvas again and again. It would be another month, maybe more, before the harvest would fully ripen to the palest gold and show the farmers exactly when to be out at first light, scything and stacking the hay into tall stooks. The grain would go to the mill to provide the household and those in the locality with flour, and what they didn't need would be taken to London to be sold. It was a lucrative business for Sir Robert. In the foreground of the painting, she'd added 2 people, a woman and a small child, and as she applied a tiny smear of golden red to the woman's hair, she smiled. From the hall below came the chime of the big clock, announcing that it was 2 o'clock. She had somewhere to be in 30 minutes, and quickly she began to clean her brushes and put everything away. She had not set eyes on her sister Marie all day. According to her lady's maid, Esther, Marie had a bad head and was resting. This was not unusual, and was doubtless in direct correlation with the fact that they hadn't seen Sir Robert, Marie's husband, and Jeanne's brother-in-law, for almost a week. Everyone in the household knew where he was. They had arrived at Woodham, a large oak-framed manor house in the remote Suffolk countryside, from Paris 10 years previously, when Jeanne was 14 and her sister 24. Marie's marriage to Sir Robert had been arranged by their cousin after their father passed away. Their presence in his newly inherited home now a nuisance to him. Woodham felt quiet after living in Paris, but with its extensive gardens set in beautiful parklands, she'd come to love it as her home. And she was lucky to have a laboratory out in an old forge in which to practice her alchemy skills. With a large dowry already put aside by their father for Marie, it hadn't taken long for someone to make an offer. And that person had been Sir Robert Woodham. Jeanne had nowhere else to go, so had no choice but to accompany her sister to England. Shortly after they arrived, Sir Robert had informed her that, with no dowry provided by their cousin, who now owned their late father's estate, he wouldn't be able to find Jeanne a husband of a suitable class to marry her. She was 14 at the time and cared not, and now, 10 years later, and a confirmed spinster at the age of 24, she still felt the same, even though it meant there was no chance for her to have a life and a home of her own. As she gazed out of the window, Jeanne mused that nobody at the hall had questioned where Sir Robert was, because he'd be where he always was when away from home, at Faxfield Manor, the home of his mistress, Lady Lettice Faxfield. She'd been widowed 5 years ago at the age of 28, and within 12 months, she was in bed with Sir Robert. They had made no secret of the fact, and now they had a 3-year-old son, Henry, and another baby due at any moment if the servants' gossip was true. No doubt that imminent birth was the reason why he was presently away from home. Jeanne had long suspected, although she did not speak of it to her sister, that it was no coincidence Faxfield's lands bordered one side of the estate here at Woodham Hall. With no other male Faxfield relatives or older children than Henry, one day that manor and title would be his, and Jeanne was quite sure that if her brother-in-law could think of a way to engineer it, then the 2 estates would be combined into one very large and very wealthy one. Sir Robert might pretend he was in love with Lettice Faxfield, but everyone knew it was lust and greed spurring him on. How long before she too was reduced to tears by the sly cruelty and verbal abuse the vile monster meted out to his wife? Jeanne had helped Esther, her sister's maid, make poultices and balms for Marie's bruises on many occasions. Stopping off at the kitchen, on her way to her rendezvous, she collected some ale, together with a picnic of strawberries and some freshly baked clove and honey buns. As she suspected she would, Jeanne found her niece, Helene, in the orchard, playing a game of chase with the girl's governess, Charlotte, both of them lifting their heavy gowns to their shins, allowing them to run. There was a lot of shrieking as Helene adeptly dodged Charlotte each time she got close. Nobody in the house ever seemed to care how much noise the young girl made. As her mother, it was Marie who should be admonishing her daughter's noisy and wayward ways. It wasn't considered how a girl of their class should behave, but Marie had little input in Helene's life. She had fallen into a deep melancholy after the girl was born, and her sorrow was intensified by subsequent lost babies. Now, she was just a husk of the bright young woman in Paris that Jeanne remembered. Helene's discipline was left to Charlotte and Jeanne, and they both indulged the child more than they sensibly should have. Given that she so rarely saw her parents, they had become unofficial guardians, both loving her fiercely. They would protect her to the ends of the earth. Immediately Jeanne smiled, her heart, as it always did, warming at the sight of the girl and of Charlotte. "Caught you!" She stepped from behind a gnarled apple tree and tapped Helene on the arm as she ran past. "Oh, Aunt Jeanne!" The girl put her hands on her knees and bent forward, her long dark hair, which was left loose, falling forward and covering her flushed cheeks. Charlotte hurried over, her own face pink from exertion, her strawberry blonde hair escaping from her kerchief and sticking to her cheeks. Jeanne felt her smile widen. "Thank you," Charlotte gasped, putting her hand to her chest. "I thought I would never catch her and would die of fatigue." "Come and sit down then," Jeanne said, indicating the blanket now laid out on the coarse tufts of grass. "I have fruit and ale and some cake." Helene immediately threw herself down and poured herself a cup of ale, draining it straight down. "It is not polite to help yourself first," Charlotte gently reprimanded. "Remember your manners." One day, Helene would need to find a husband. She'd bring a decent dowry, and whoever Sir Robert chose for her, he'd expect her to behave accordingly. "Sorry." Helene blushed a little before offering the cakes to each of them, remembering that Jeanne had to be first. Once they had taken theirs, she wandered off with her own, picking some of the wild flowers which were now scattered in abundance across the meadow. The yellow of buttercups and coltsfoot, the dusky blue of cornflowers. For a moment, left on their own, the 2 women silently watched her. "You are very dishevelled after your game," Jeanne said, smiling, as she stretched across and tucked a wayward curl, as bright as firelight, behind Charlotte's ear. touching the other woman's soft skin. Her heart was beating so fast, she thought that not only Charlotte, but the whole of Suffolk could hear it. Chapter 3, 2026. Wait, what? Just tell me all that again, but more slowly. Paige's sister-in-law, Vicky, slammed her coffee cup down so violently it slopped the contents over the table. Wordlessly, Paige picked up a roll of kitchen paper and pulled off several sheets, mopping up the pale brown puddle. They were sitting in Vicky's kitchen in her cottage, 2 old workers' cottages that Vicky and George, Paige's older brother, had knocked through to make one larger house behind the old hall. George was currently out with her 8-year-old son, Aaron, having drawn the short straw as to who was going to stand on the sidelines at Saturday morning football, and Paige was secretly relieved. Although she loved her brother, she was as close to Vicky as if she were an actual sister, and she could do without George being macho and threatening court action when he discovered what Tyler had done. It wouldn't change anything. "I've told you everything," Paige shrugged. She could at least now tell her sorry tale without crying, although the tears were never far away. "All the while, I thought we were happily married, and he was simply co-parenting at his former marital home. And it turns out he was married to Lauren. She isn't simply an ex-girlfriend. He'd explained it to me. It's called nesting, and it's a real thing. I looked it up. The child stays in the house, the nest, and the parents come and go, instead of the child moving between 2 houses. He said that Lauren had a boyfriend, and she stayed with him when she wasn't in the house with Ava. Except, obviously, that was a lie, too. I've been so stupid, caught up in a whirlwind romance and letting myself be carried away. When he suggested we eloped and got married in Vegas, I just agreed. It all felt so exciting. Even though, really, I'd always imagined marrying here in my own home. But why marry you? Why the bigamy? Sorry, so many questions. Vicky shook her head. I don't suppose you even have answers. I just can't get my head around it. Neither can I, to be honest. He loved me so much he wanted to marry me, or so he claims. He wanted both of us, both his happy lives. He could hardly tell me he was married when he started the affair, so he just said she was his ex-girlfriend. Talk about having his cake and eating it. What a cliché. And now he has neither. I have no idea where he is now, nor do I care. Except she knew that deep down, despite her defiant words, she couldn't stop caring. And she didn't know how she ever could. You're welcome to stay in our spare room, of course. But I suspect Simon has already got you settled in the family home. Let's face it, he isn't short of space. No, indeed, Paige agreed. I'm back in my old bedroom. She'd spent the previous night laid on her back, staring up at the same crack, which wound its jagged way across the ceiling that she'd stared at her whole childhood. Until finally, she fell asleep to the sounds of the dawn chorus filling the room with exultant birdsong, as daylight's enduring fingers crept in around the edges of the curtains. I've brought all my work paraphernalia with me. I have some orders to fulfill, but I can do that anywhere with decent light, so I intend to set everything up in my bedroom for now. Long term, though, who knows what I'll do. I don't actually need to be in London. I can work anywhere, given that I sell everything online. I just lived there because Tyler needed to be close to work. What a fool I've been. Well, you don't need to make any rash decisions yet, do you? What about your mum? Have you spoken to her yet? I called her last night. Of course she's fuming, just as Dad is, and have the offer of a bed there if I want one, although she was quick to point out that there's loads more space here. I've agreed I'll go and visit in a couple of weeks when I feel a bit calmer, Paige said. In all honesty, I think Simon would appreciate some help while you're staying here. I've noticed he's been looking increasingly stressed these past few months. It's coming up to peak wedding season. Sorry. Paige had winced as Vicky mentioned the word wedding. But the subject was fairly unavoidable, given that the family home was now a popular venue for that very occasion. It was the only way the big listed building could earn its keep, as Simon had often reminded her and George. Woodham Hall was a timber-framed, medieval manor house and had been in the family for the past 500 years. It was beautiful, but with its ancient bones, it was also a money pit with constant repairs needed, all of which had to be overseen by the council conservation department. And with the utility bills and upkeep growing increasingly monstrous, several years ago, Simon had made the decision to leave his job at the bank and turn the main reception rooms and an upstairs bedroom into a wedding venue. Paige had noticed that morning, when she'd looked out of her bedroom window which overlooked the gardens, that the marquee was already in place for the summer. It would remain there until October, when the company they rented it from would return and dismantle it until the following spring. Could she really help her dad arrange other people's perfect days, when there were reminders of her own in every dark, now tear-stained corner? Less than 2 hours later, Simon was proposing exactly the situation Vicky had predicted. Returning to the hall, Paige found him in his office, his fingers hitting the keys on his laptop as though he had a personal grudge against them. It was one of the few rooms in the front half of the house which he still used for himself, almost all of the other reception space now devoted to the business. Most of the ground floor was made up of the grand hall with its baronial decor, a vaulted hammer-beam ceiling, and tall stone mullioned windows, with, in places, their original tiny diamond-leaded panes. It now had rows of chairs on the flagstone floor and was used as a ceremony room. The deep windowsills spent the summer months filled with glorious flower arrangements. Although Paige loved to see the voluminous white roses and overblown pink peonies, her favourites were the ones with an array of wild flowers and grasses which spilled seeds and petals on the floor to pave the way for each bride, like nature's confetti. At the rear of the building, several of the myriad of old rooms had been converted into a professional kitchen for the caterers, a mix of companies depending on whoever the wedding party chose. French doors led through a former parlour to the marquee where guests ate and later danced, and some of the original servants' rooms were now converted into toilets. The old steward's apartment was a family living room. Across the courtyard, the stables were used for storage. Upstairs they did, however, still have use of all the bedrooms, bar the largest one, which was kept for the brides who chose to get ready at the venue. Paige had always thought it was a shame that the original chapel in the grounds had been left to become derelict, and now probably unsafe, because that would have been the perfect space for a wedding.
I know it isn't a subject that you want to think about. I appreciate that. Simon started. But I seriously need a hand here. I can't run as many events as I need to keep the business afloat, and now we're beginning to sink, which means that the hall is no longer self-funding. If I can't turn it around in the next 12 months, I have to sell it, and that would break my heart. This is yours and George's inheritance, our ancestral home. Our family has been living here for centuries, but the costs of running it are, especially over the past few years, astronomical. I need more bookings or something else to generate an income, but it's exhausting on my own. I can't do more than one wedding a fortnight at the moment, and I don't have the energy to dream up other ways to make the place viable. I was going to employ someone. However, I'd far rather it was you, because you know this place better than any outsider. You're more likely to have some good ideas, and also, now you're here on site. At some point in the next few years, I want to retire, and George has already made it clear he doesn't want to run the business, not when he's worked so hard to become a partner at his law firm. And anyway, if I can't increase the revenue, then there'll be nothing to leave.
Paige sat in her chair for a moment, stunned by what she'd just been told. She'd always assumed, and she was sure that George had too, that the house was ticking over nicely and would always be there for them. Now, it seemed the only ticking was from the bomb about to go off and blow their home and their futures apart. "Does George know you're in financial difficulties?" she asked.
No, although I have mentioned how tired I am, and Vicky has said on a couple of occasions that I'm looking haggard.
Paige thought back to the conversation she'd had with her sister-in-law earlier that day, when she'd spoken of Simon looking stressed. They all should have realised long before this admission. She admitted to herself that she'd stayed away too long, not giving Woodham a second thought as she enjoyed her life in London. Her married life, she thought sadly. I bet she didn't say haggard. Paige gave her dad a wry smile and nudged him with her elbow. He grinned back, shaking his head. Okay, perhaps not, but words to that effect. I do have a career too, Paige pointed out. I earn a good living with my millinery, so I don't have any intention of stopping. No, I know, but if you could find time to help me as well, to save this place, I'd be incredibly grateful. It was, Paige pondered, as though her father had planned out what he was going to say to sound the most persuasive before he started. As he had rightly said, she could fit her commissions around helping him. Okay, she agreed. I'll give it a go. I'll stay for the summer and see how I feel at the end of it. Whether I stay on or decide it isn't for me. Right now, I feel broken. So perhaps Woodham will be the place to mend me. Chapter 4, 1672. Eventually, the companionable silence shared by Jeanne and Charlotte was broken by Helene returning, her hands full of flowers. Flopping down beside them, she laid them out as Jeanne selected several and began to weave them into a coronet. Around them, the bees droned sleepily in the warmth of the day, and high above, a lark's jubilant song carried across the fields. The scent of the sweet Sicily she was weaving made Jeanne sigh with pleasure. I have heard, she said, as she finished the crown and balanced it on Helene's curls before starting another one, that there are kittens at the mill. I was thinking of walking there to see them this afternoon, and perhaps choosing one to keep me company in the evenings. Would you like to accompany me? Oh, yes, may we please? Helene looked across at Charlotte, her eyes wide and her hands pressed together as though in prayer. Perhaps I might select one for myself as well. If your aunt has suggested we go with her, then I do not see why not, Charlotte agreed. Despite Jeanne's position within the household being a higher one, she always insisted that as Charlotte was governess and in charge of the nursery, it was her final decision where Helene was concerned. But having a kitten for yourself is something we must consider carefully. They take a lot of work to look after. You would have to ask your mamma. Helene jumped straight to her feet, her face flushed with eagerness as she stood with her hands on her hips, insisting the two women stood so she could tidy away the picnic. Before they did so, Jeanne placed the other coronet she'd been weaving on Charlotte's head. Leaving the blanket and basket beneath a tree to collect on their way home, they went through a gate at the back of the orchard towards the barley fields, which led to the common and the mill. They started to walk, the tall stalks of grain brushing against their skirts, leaving a trail of golden dust and the sweet smell of warm summer meadows. Tugging a strand out of the ground, Jeanne used it to tickle Helene's ear, making the girl giggle and run ahead. As they reached their destination, Helene's voice could be heard cooing and chattering inside. They discovered her sitting in the corner behind the miller's wife, Bess, who was busy weighing sacks of flour. Beside her, in the dim light, the great millstones rumbled, grinding slowly in circles against each other. Good day, Bess, Jeanne said. How lovely it is in here, so much cooler than outside beneath the sun. Her neck was sweating where the back of her head had burned as she walked. Good day to you too, mistress. It is always far more pleasant in here in the summer, but not so in the winter, when the stone walls are lined with ice day and night. Have you come for flour, or were you dragged here by the little miss, who has, as you can see, discovered our latest additions? I am afraid it was I who mentioned the kittens, Jeanne admitted. I wondered if you would let me have one as a pet. When I was a child in France, we had a cat, and I think it would bring me companionship. And me? Helene's voice piped up from the corner, where she'd obviously been listening to the conversation. Please, may I have a kitten too? Charlotte has said that I may. I did not, Charlotte protested, wagging her finger at the little girl. I said we might discuss it with your mamma. That is not the same thing. You may take as many as you wish, Bess said. The rest will go. She paused and swiveled her eyes towards the mill pond outside. Elsewhere. Jeanne swallowed hard. She knew that throwing unwanted litters of puppies or kittens into the river in a sack weighted with stones often happened if homes couldn't be found. Thankfully, though, Helene was too young to realise what would happen to any that were not adopted. They couldn't take them all, but if she could save 2 from that fate, it was better than nothing. I shall make the decision, she announced, and if your mamma disagrees with me, then she will have me to answer to. You may also have a kitten, Helene. It can be a friend for my own. The girls' high-pitched squeals were probably heard back at the hall, as Jeanne and Charlotte, not thinking of their gowns, joined Helene on the flowery, dusty floor, scattered with empty, dried husks of wheat, and let her pass them each a handful of the tiny, fluffy, mewing animals. Their mother was nowhere to be seen. Whatever objections there may be at home, Jeanne was happy. The little balls of soft fur already had their eyes open, and she knew it was going to be difficult to choose which one to take. Helene had given her 2 dark grey striped cats, their big green eyes peering at her in the dim light. Charlotte had scooped up another grey kitten, together with a bright orange ginger one with white paws. Sitting cross-legged with her skirts making a dip in the middle, Helene was trying to contain a further 3 squirming balls of fluff. All of these were a mix of white and orange in varying degrees. Lots of different colours, Jeanne remarked as she gently blew into the fur on the back of the kitten she was holding up. Aye, probably more than one Tom can accept parentage, Bess said. It is not unheard of where cats are concerned. After a while, they all swapped the kittens they were holding, so Jeanne now had 2 of the ginger ones. They were all equally sweet, and she didn't know which one she was going to choose. She decided to wait and see which one Helene wanted first. They were still there 30 minutes later, when finally Jeanne got to her feet and stamped them up and down. This floor is too uncomfortable, she said. I no longer have any feeling in my legs. Charlotte also stood up. It is time we walked home, she warned Helene. You need to decide which kitten you would like, and we can return another day with a basket from the kitchen in which to carry them home. And after you have made your choice, then I will make my own, Jeanne said. It is so difficult. I love them all. Helene looked at Jeanne with big eyes, her face the image of pleading. Are you sure I cannot take 2 for myself? Please? I am very sure, Jeanne laughed. I will probably be in trouble with your mamma for saying yes even to one of them, especially as I shall be taking another. I will pretend I have seen mice in my room, and a cat is needed for vermin control. Eventually, the little girl decided on the darkest of the grey striped kittens, and happily Jeanne picked up the kitten that she already loved the most, a ginger with 3 white socks and a white tip to its tail. She told Bess they would return soon with a basket, and they set off back to Woodham Hall. By the time they arrived home an hour later, the sun was lower in the sky behind them, but still warm on their backs. Jeanne could feel her face was flushed and hot, and she hoped that she didn't have to explain to her sister where she'd been just yet. She planned to explain about the kittens when they were already ensconced in the household and more difficult to eject. Perhaps her sister might even decide to have one as a pet for herself, the small companion to cheer her sad days. Chapter 5, 2026. If you suddenly think of any amazing ideas, do please shout. Simon was walking down the main majestic staircase, with Paige following behind, a notebook and pen in her hand. She looked back towards from where they'd come, the bedroom put aside for brides to use for getting ready on their big day, until the moment when they swept down the wide oak steps, the wooden banister blackened after centuries of hands gripping them. Or children sliding down, despite being told not to.
she remembered with a wry smile. George landing on the stone entrance hall floor and knocking himself unconscious had ended that particular escapade. "I will have a brainstorm," she agreed, "but I suspect whatever I suggest will be things you've already thought of," she pointed out as they reached the wide hallway, brightly lit from the line of tall windows across the front of the house, which flooded the space with light. The top of each one was decorated with tiny panes of stained glass, depicting the Woodham crest. The sunlight filtered through to decorate the pale stone slabs on the floor with an ever-shifting kaleidoscope of colour. She followed Simon through into the room which had originally been a parlour and was now lined with bookcases, out through the double doors in the back wall, and from there into the marquee. There was a tunnel of tarpaulin to ensure that on wet days nobody need step outside. To one side, a corridor led to the toilets. "This room is a bit bleak, Dad." Paige stopped in the parlour and turned around on the spot in the shadowy space. Despite the wall sconces, which now held electric lights instead of the original candles, the original iron chandelier was still hanging above them, and the dark, panelled walls, bookcases lined with ancient, dusty tomes, and the walls hung with old paintings gave it a gloomy appearance. "Why don't you redecorate somehow to make it more appealing? The guests go from the beautiful light ceremony room and into this dismal space." "Well, having the marquee straight from the double doors, it cuts out most of the natural light," he pointed out. Just two narrow windows higher up the wall threw down any illumination. "These paintings, though," she said, "I know they add to the historical atmosphere, which people like about the place, and that they're family heirlooms, but they're quite dour, aren't they?" She pointed to a row of old dark oil paintings along one wall. All but one of them were portraits of grim-looking ancestors, the surfaces black with dust and age, the crazed varnish increasing their dejected appearance. "And this one? It's not exactly a subject for people to think about on their wedding day, is it?" She stopped in front of the one painting which wasn't a portrait. Instead, it showed a group of 4 people slumped in their chairs around a long table laden with food. One of them had their head resting on the table, and a woman was motionless on the floor. On the frame was a small plaque with the title, Phaedra, 1672. "Ah, the supposed mass murder." Simon stood beside her. "What a shame we don't have any proof, and it's just a family rumour. I moved it away from the entrance hall because it isn't a cheerful subject with which to welcome people." "Yes, well, mass murders aren't usually associated with weddings, though, are they? But they still have to walk past it in here." "Why this title? What does it mean? And do you even know who these people were? Did Grandpa ever tell you that?" "Actually, I don't. He said that he knew nothing more than he had told me. The painting is supposed to depict a mass murder in the hall. I do know that Phaedra is from Greek mythology, a princess known for her revenge. Which sounds like why a murder might be committed, doesn't it? Retribution. Why don't you do some investigations while you're here? If you can discover that the murders really happened, that this is an account of a true event, it will be good for trade. We could get some excellent publicity, maybe something on the local news. Right now, we need all the help we can get. Besides, I've often wondered about it. What do you think?" "I don't know. I suspect it would probably be a huge waste of time. It was centuries ago, so how could I research that? And in case you've forgotten, I'm supposed to be thinking of ways to prevent the house from being sold, which is the most urgent matter." At this point, her voice almost broke. She had lost her husband. Now this piece of rock in her life, her dad, and this house, one shifting sand. Their family home. She couldn't let this slip through her fingers too. "Well, just have a think about it." Simon smiled at her. "But now, come into the kitchen and let me take you through what we have to prepare for the caterers. These days, it's almost always a woman named Kathy and her assistants. She's great. You'll like her. And I've got a photographer coming later to do a recce before a wedding the weekend after next. Why don't you shadow me on that day? It'll be good for you to properly see everything that I do."
For a moment he walked away, and Paige stayed where she was, looking at the painting in its ornate gilded frame. She'd walked past it every day as a child, and she'd often wondered about it. Who were these people, and who had supposedly wanted them all dead? She knew her father had just gently suggested she investigated it as a means to take her mind off the awfulness of her situation. But perhaps it would be a fun distraction, to stop her dwelling on the tragedy that was currently her life, as everything she had believed to be true and solid fell away beneath her feet. "Just hold on there," she told the ageless diners, their gruesome end forever paused in time. For a moment, the air surrounding her became still and harsh with cold. So cold that it was making her teeth chatter, despite her trying to clench them together and stop it. Her breath came out of her mouth in a little cloud of icy droplets, and she was certain that someone was standing behind her, but she was too afraid to move her head and look. Her heart began to pound, and, without another word, she ran after Simon as he disappeared down the passage towards the kitchen. Chapter 6, 1672. Jeanne cocked her head on one side and listened, her brows low over her eyes as she did so. With the back of her hand, she swept away a stray tendril of her deep brown, almost black hair, which had escaped her linen coif from her face. Somewhere, from within the house, she could hear the sound of what was almost certainly her sister, howling. The noise carried, as it always did, along the numerous corridors in the imposing hall, escaping around window frames, through open doors. Even though Jeanne was in an outbuilding, a now redundant space previously used by the local blacksmith, she could still hear it. Her chest rose and fell as she sighed deeply. Laid out before her was an experiment she'd been working on for days, having read a scandalous pamphlet about the infamous aqua toscana, a poison being used in Italy. She was nowhere near creating anything that looked right. Now she'd have to pause her work and go and discover what had upset Marie. Quickly scratching some symbols, only things that as a budding alchemist she would understand, into the soft stone of the wall behind the furnace, she rubbed some soot with her finger across them to hopefully disguise what she'd just done. Wiping her fingers on her apron, she removed it, hanging it on a rough peg on the back of the door, and went to discover what was happening in the house. The wailing was nothing new. Her sister Marie's dark and deep sadness, which had started after Helene's birth and increased as she lost 3 subsequent babies, had never gone. And now, at the age of 34, Marie's melancholy was a part of her, as though a robe that she slipped on every morning when she awoke, so familiar to her she was unable to shake it off. Jeanne found Marie in her parlour, her face dark red and washed with tears. She drifted across the room back and forth, the blocked heels of her shoes clattering loudly on the wooden floorboards. "Sister, do please sit down." Jeanne tried to make herself heard, but her own soft voice was no competition against her sister's high-pitched cries. Esther, her lady's maid, had followed her in, holding up her hands in consternation, but they both knew any intervention by her would be fruitless, and eventually she disappeared again, leaving Jeanne to try and calm Marie. This she did with limited success. "Come, take a seat with me beside the fire," Jeanne tried again. "I will pour you some wine, and cook has made some sweetmeats. See here." She lifted a silver dish. "Let me bring some over." Marie had a sweet tooth, and usually the appearance of sugared fruit or marchpane would put her in a better mood. Today, though, they weren't working their magic. As, now seated where Jeanne had indicated, she continued crying loudly whilst rocking back and forth. Placing a glass of wine and the dish of morsels on a small table, Jeanne took her own drink and sat down. "Please," she implored, "tell me what distresses you so." "It is him," Marie eventually spluttered, small droplets of the wine she was now sipping spraying out onto her saffron-yellow grosgrain gown. Jeanne didn't need to ask as to whom she was referring. Sir Robert was always the instigator of Marie's unhappiness. "And her," Marie added. Jeanne also knew exactly who the her was. Marie was referring to Lettice, and immediately she guessed what had induced this most recent outburst. "Has the new babe arrived?" she asked in a small voice, afraid of what the response might be. Marie was perched on the edge of her seat, as though she may spring up at any moment. "Apparently so." Her wavering voice was now low, as though she could hardly bear to say the words out loud. "I have received a letter from my husband, sent from Faxfield, informing me he has another son." Now Jeanne could feel a modicum of sympathy for her sister. Her own 2 sons and another daughter, all born too early and sleeping. They were laid to rest in a quiet corner of the churchyard surrounding the chapel and the grounds at Woodham. Sir Robert had decreed that as they had not been baptised, they therefore could not be laid to rest within the Woodham vault, although he had not commented when they were buried within the churchyard walls. No wonder Marie was so upset. She had been relegated to a necessary ornament to be brought out when Sir Robert was at home, which was rare now, and entertaining local dignitaries. "This is not just a wound to my own life," Marie added with a sniff. "It affects you too. You spending all your time in your little building beside the stables, making potions and playing at alchemy, or up in the schoolroom with my daughter. You pretend to have quiet, mouse-like ways, thinking nobody will even notice you are here. But we both know this is not your true disposition. I know the real Jeanne, and the fire you keep hidden. Who knows what will happen now my husband has 2 heirs to his fortune, illegitimate or not. Now might be the time you will have to show your true colours. We may have to fight to keep our heads above the water." Jeanne didn't need telling of that. It was difficult to predict Sir Robert's often erratic behaviour, and it was easier for her to hide below deck than be close to the violent weather above. Although this time, she admitted to herself, she might not be able to. At all costs, she had to protect her sister. From the garden, Jeanne could hear Helene's and Charlotte's laughter. The day's lessons must be over, and she itched to be outside with them. "Perhaps you should take a tisane of poppy seeds," Jeanne suggested, knowing that the calming opium would make her sister sleepy. Thankfully, Marie nodded, and before she could change her mind, Jeanne jumped to her feet and offered to go and arrange it. Once her sister was settled, she'd be free to join the other 2. Although the shadow of another son born to Sir Robert now hung over them all, illegitimate or not, potentially his place and power already usurped their own. Chapter 7. 1672. The fragile tranquillity that the opium briefly brought was torn apart the following afternoon, when the shouts of several men, accompanied by the sound of horses' hooves, indicated an arrival at the hall. Helene ran to the window of the nursery which overlooked the courtyard. "It is just my papa," she announced. "Truly, he does make a lot of noise for one person, does he not? Why does he shout so?" "Your father may speak to people how he wishes," Jeanne reprimanded, as she beckoned Helene back to the game of cards they were all playing. "He is the master of this house, and all of us in it, including you. Before you know it, he will be looking for a husband for you, someone for you to be betrothed to. It is as well for you to remember that." Chastised, Helene sat down and picked up her cards again. Charlotte's eyes met Jeanne's over the girl's head, and an unspoken sadness passed between them. 10 minutes later, Helene had won 3 games of Primero, when her exuberant, gleeful celebrations were interrupted by a knock at the door. "Enter," Jeanne called out. In her absence, Charlotte was in charge of the suite of rooms which made up the nursery wing, but however close their friendship, when she was present, she immediately became the senior. The face of one of the young maids peered around the door. "I'm to inform you, Miss Jeanne, that you are required to be at supper this evening in the dining hall," she said. "And the mistress too. Her maid has been told." Jeanne nodded, and the face disappeared again, its message safely delivered. "I wonder why I have been invited," she mused out loud. "I do not usually go to supper, as you know, but it has not been questioned. And I have certainly never been given a command, told that I must attend." She had a horrible feeling. There was something nasty crawling like a reptile through the house, a bad smell in the air, pervading every room, every corner. "I had better go and see Marie," she added. Getting to her feet, she kissed the top of Helene's head, smoothing her hand down her long, glossy hair. "If the meal does not take long, I may come back to bid you both good night, but if not, I shall see you tomorrow. The seamstress is coming to visit Marie in the morning, and you two are to be measured for new gowns, Helene. You are growing so fast. She has promised me a dress too, so I might see you then." Leaving them, Jeanne walked through the house to her sister's suite of rooms. As mistress of the house, Marie had an apartment comprising a chamber for herself, another smaller one which was little more than a cupboard for her maid Esther, and a spacious parlour, all situated above the main entrance to the hall. This was where Jeanne now found her. "Sister, how are you today?" Kissing Marie on the cheek, Jeanne took the seat opposite her beside the fire. "I am well, thank you. I heard my husband arriving home. My lord, how his voice carries." She turned the corners of her mouth down. "He has not appeared in here, though, and for that I am thankful. To what do I owe the benefit of your presence?" Jeanne swallowed hard, trusting that what she had to impart wouldn't upset her sister. She hoped that Esther would have already spoken to Marie, but it appeared not. "One of the maids came to see me to say that we are both to be at supper in the dining hall this evening. The master has bade it." Marie frowned. "I cannot imagine why, but we will not know unless we attend. And we both know that we do not have any option but to be there. I must wash and then change my gown, as must you."